So welcome to today's webinar, Learn How to Improve Data Integrity with Bluehill Universal's Enhanced Security. Thanks for attending. It's great to have you all with us. My name is Veronica Costa, and I'm one of the marketing specialists here at Instron. I'll be your host for this quick knowledge session, but Elayne Gordonov will be doing the real work with today's presentation. Elayne is the product manager for our software platform, Bluehill Universal. As product manager, she works closely with our amazing clients and our team of software developers to continually enhance the features of Bluehill Universal, which are critical to solving the testing challenges in your current and future applications. So one other exciting bit of news I want to share. As of last night, Elayne has officially completed her MBA. So congrats, Elayne.
Yay.
And before I turn things over to Elayne, I just have one quick housekeeping item about questions. Please feel free to send in any questions at any time using the chat feature. We'll try to answer most of your questions at the end, but some we might end up addressing individually after the webinar through email. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Elayne.
Okay, thanks, Veronica. So as mentioned, my name is Elayne Gordonov, and I'm the product manager for Instron's static software, so that's including Bluehill Universal and Trend Tracker. And I'm excited to talk about Bluehill's new enhanced security with you today. So in today's webinar, we will discuss why a lab would benefit from using the security features built into Bluehill Universal. We'll also review the 3 security options available in Bluehill Universal, including a live demo of some of the security features. And finally, as a special bonus, I'll cover the 2 newer features within Bluehill, including creating subsamples in your results, as well as adding a PassFail component to your workspace. And then finally, we'll open it up to some Q&A. So why use the security options in Bluehill Universal? There are many reasons, but at a high level, the 3 main reasons are safety, data integrity, and tracking data generation. Using Bluehill's security functionality improves safety as user permissions can be configured such that only trained individuals will have access to the system to run a test. This prevents untrained operators from using the system and potentially damaging the equipment or having an accident themselves. Next, data integrity is the more obvious one. Bluehill Universal's security options can be configured to limit a user's ability to change or modify test parameters. For example, security can be configured to limit an operator's ability to delete or change tested specimens, to disabling the operator's ability to also edit the test methods. And finally, Bluehill Universal security can help track who ran what test by displaying the logged in user's username in the results table, as well as adding things like the date and time the test was actually run. So at a high level, safety, data integrity, and tracking, this is why someone would want to use security, Bluehill security. Now let's go into more detail about the security types. This is probably obvious, but I just wanted to make sure it is clear to everyone listening. The security function can be enabled or disabled in the software. However, once enabled, only the system administrators can turn the security off. So if security is turned off, Bluehill will not require a username or password to log into the software, and all users will have full access to the software. When security is enabled, there are 3 options to choose from. There's Bluehill-based security, which this is built into Bluehill Universal. There's Windows-based security, so this is linking your local Windows login with the login to Bluehill. And finally, there's Active Directory. So this is using the username, the user's Windows login on a corporate network. So for those of you that are familiar with maybe Bluehill 2 or Bluehill 3, in those versions of the software, we only had the Bluehill-based security. So let's first review the Bluehill-based security. The Bluehill Universal security that's built into the software, so if you're a user that's familiar with Bluehill 2 or Bluehill 3, this is what we had in those versions. So this is security that's internal to the software, and it's independent from the login, your Windows login. Each person has an individual user profile for each system. So the individual user profile must be created on each Instron system that you have. And access to the software requires a user's login credentials. So using Bluehill security, Instron has 3 predefined user types. So that's an operator, a manager, and an administrator. So administrators have the most control, which should be pretty obvious. So an administrator can configure the system, configure the security for the system, they have full rights to edit test methods, and they have full rights to test specimens. So usually it requires, your system will require at least one administrator, but you can have multiple if you need that. A manager does not have the ability to configure the system and configure security. So a manager in Bluehill security only has the ability to edit methods and test specimens. And then finally, operators only have the ability to test specimens. So when you're setting up Bluehill, you would create a new user. So if I was being created as a user using Bluehill security, someone would create me as Elayne, and they would choose to make me an administrator, a manager, and an operator. And based on that choice, I would have the permissions in the green box to the right. So next, let's review Windows-based security. So Windows security is based on the Windows user groups that are configured on the computer where Bluehill Universal is installed. Permissions on each system are assigned to a group. So users in that group have the group's assigned privileges. And access to Bluehill Universal requires the user's Windows local credentials. So I think this one's pretty straightforward. You would log into your computer using your Windows. You would also use that same login to access Bluehill. In order to initially configure Windows-based security, the system administrator must be logged into the system. So at least in my case, I'm using my Instron work laptop right now. And although it's my laptop and my user account is on this, I'm actually not the system administrator of my own PC. My IT department's the system administrator. So if I wanted to use this Windows login on configure Bluehill to use the Windows login, I actually wouldn't be able to do that because I'm not the system administrator. So just something to keep in mind, that the system administrator of the computer where Bluehill is installed will need to be the first person to configure security as the administrator. Now, obviously, once that administrator logs in and adds more Windows users, they can also make those folks the administrator as well, but just something I wanted to clarify. And finally, the one that I'm personally most excited for is Active Directory. So Active Directory is like Windows, however, the security permissions are based on the user groups on that system's corporate network. So permissions on each system are assigned to a group. Users included in that group have that group's assigned privileges, so similar to the Windows-based. And access to Bluehill requires the user's network credentials. So for example, if a laboratory has multiple Instron systems, individual users of the Instron system are added to groups on the corporate network. Those groups are then configured on each system using Active Directory, and that's pretty much it. So once those users are configured, you can now go to each Instron system and select the groups in the admin tab, and you're good to go. So if you have 20 Instron users, instead of having to set up 20 unique users on each system, you simply need to set those 20 users up in Active Directory, and then your setup is essentially complete. So one thing to note too, Active Directory user groups should be determined before the Instron system is installed. And we have a handy document that a lab manager or super user in a lab that's using Instron systems can give to their IT department to work this out before the system is installed. So we'll share that a little bit later. The lab manager will need to identify what groups need to be created and what users should be assigned to those groups. And the IT administrator will need to create the security groups and add the appropriate users to each security group as determined by the lab manager. So again, we have a document that could kind of help walk you through that. So then once you do have your system set up, it's very easy for your Instron field service engineer or for you to set up right out of the box. So let's do a quick recap. So for your options for security, you could configure your system without any security, which depending on what your testing is, maybe that's the right thing for you if you're an R&D lab and you're making changes all the time and maybe you don't want to limit operators or you don't need to necessarily lock down the permissions. But if you do need to lock down the permissions a bit more, if you're in production testing or quality control, there are 3 options. There's the Bluehill based, the Windows based, and Active Directory. So just some additional things that I wanted to mention. If you're using the Bluehill based, the administrator can require users to change the password on the next login. Administrators can also set password expiration criteria. And in addition to the predefined levels, so the levels that are predefined by Instron, it's the operators, the lab manager, and the administrator. The administrator can also customize several other more minute permissions. But I just wanted to mention that administrators can force users to change their password and set password criteria because this differs from the Windows or Active Directory. Since it's linked, those are linked to Windows and Active Directory, you have the password expiration criteria and the password length and character requirements as dictated by your IT group. So at least for me at Instron, I know my IT group makes me change my password every 90 days, and I can't use the same one that I used last time, and it has to meet certain length and character requirements. So that still holds true if you're using the Windows or Active Directory. If you're not and you're using the Bluehill base, you could still set those password permissions. Something else that I wanted to mention about Active Directory, lab managers have the ability to customize Bluehill Universal permissions for individual users, meaning that you don't just have to create 3 different types. You don't have to stick with the model of operator, manager, and admin. You can really mix and match and configure it completely how you see fit. You can have 20 groups, 30 groups, or if you just want, maybe you just want 2. You want an operators and a super users, and that's it. So Bluehill Universal uses the password criteria expiration set by the IT administrator, so we just covered that. And then in addition, in Active Directory, Bluehill Universal has 2 common groups, an all users and a no users, and this is designed to allow for easier permission selection. So if there's something that we want all users to have access to, maybe it's logging into the software, we can just select all users instead of having to create a specific group for that. And that might be a bit clearer when we will do the software demo now. Okay, so I hope everyone can see. I have Bluehill Universal on my screen open. So I'm going to go into the admin tab because this is where the security permissions are configured. And there's a tab here, security. So for those of you that are maybe on Bluehill 1 or Bluehill 2 or 3, you can see the screen looks a bit different. Also, if you're on one of the earlier versions of Universal, this will probably also look different. So if you purchased Bluehill Universal in the last year or so, you're still under warranty and you can upgrade to this latest version and get all of these great security features. Also, if you're using Instron Connect, you can download the latest version of software right from your computer right now if you want it. So we can see there's a little blurb here explaining the different security types, and I can simply drop down and choose which one I want. So I'm going to choose Active Directory, and then I'm going to select Change. So now it's prompting me to enter my username and my password. Now, prior to doing this, I asked my IT group to create 3 different user groups on the Instron domain and put my user account into one of those groups. So I log in with my Windows login. And right now, Bluehill is validating my login with the groups that were created on the corporate domain. So I already configured this, but we'll go to Edit Permissions. So the 3 groups that we asked our IT department to create is a Bluehill Operators, a Bluehill Managers, and a Bluehill Administrators group. As mentioned, you don't have to stick with those predefined if you maybe want just an admin and a super users group, or you can really configure that how you see fit. And then also, as mentioned, we have the common groups, all users and no users. So if I drop down this list, you can see that I can choose no users or all users, and they're always right on top. So for login, I want everyone to have the ability to log in. So I'm just going to select all users. It's just an easier thing for me to select. But you see when I do drop down here, I have all of the user groups on the Instron corporate domain. And here are my 3 groups that we've asked the department to create. So operators, managers, and administrators. So this is what you would go to your IT department at your company and ask for these groups to be configured. You can choose these 3 or completely create your own. So I'm going to stick with all users. So let's just run through this list to see what are the different permissions that can be configured within the software. So login is pretty straightforward. Those are people that you're giving them permission to log into the software. Test specimens, so this is similar to what we had previously. So this is the ability to run a test. If I want to only select maybe operators or managers or super users to run a test, this is when I would select this. So one thing that is really nice about being able to configure users on such granularity is that as your Bluehill and Instron users go through training, you can kind of control the process a bit more by once a user went through training, you can enter a help desk request or talk to your IT person and say, okay, Elayne Gordonov, she's new, she just went through training, and she's now able to run tests on the Instron, so can you move her user profile, Gordonell? She wasn't in a group before, but now I want you to move her to the Bluehill operators group, for example. So it's easier to then track training and who has access to the system. So the next one is change a tested specimen. So a use case for this would be if you're measuring your specimens, your width or thickness measurement, and someone forgot to make a measurement, they could go back and add that measurement in if this is enabled, if change of tested specimen is enabled. If it's not enabled, that means that someone couldn't go back and edit something that was already tested. Delete a specimen, this is also straightforward. This would limit or allow permission to delete a specimen after it's been tested. Exclude a tested specimen, so this you're not deleting it completely, you're just sort of hiding it from the results and hiding it from your grand statistics that you're looking at in your results table. So if you want to keep the data, but maybe it was off and you want to hide it to look at your standard deviation or average values, you could exclude it. So right now I have all of these set to no users. So I'm not allowing anyone to exclude a tested specimen. Change workspace properties. This is for changing units in the results table, or maybe changing the graph preferences. So if someone doesn't have the ability to change the workspace, that person could still do something like looking at the graph and doing a pinch to zoom graph. But if a user wanted to change maybe the y-axis on a graph from newtons to pounds force, by saying no users are able to change the workspace properties, no users will be able to do this. Override the sample location. So within the method tab, you can specify a directory to save all of your data. So within the method, you can say, I want all of my data to be saved to this folder on the desktop. But when someone's running a test, they have the ability to do a save as and maybe browse to a different location. So if you have no users are able to override the sample location, you're essentially eliminating the ability for someone to do a save as and browse to a different location. Discard the sample. This is in relation to closing out of the software with tested specimens without saving. So if you don't have any Bluehill security enabled, someone could run several tests and then exit out of the software. Bluehill will make a prompt and say, are you sure you want to close and not save any data? If someone says yes, the software will close and none of the data is saved. However, if you say no users are able to discard the sample file, Bluehill will not let a user exit out of the software without saving it. Overwrite the sample files. So this is in relation to revving different sample files up if the sample file already exists. So if we have a sample file with data from tested specimens and that's labeled ABC, and I try to run more tests, but it's already saved, and I do a save and try to name it ABC, Bluehill will force an uprev, so force someone to maybe put ABC_1 as the name. So you can't overwrite existing data. Analyze samples. So this is a module within Bluehill where a user has the ability to take a test data and run it through a different method. So we've set that to only administrators are able to do that. Edit methods, this is also fairly straightforward. This is the ability to change parameters in a method, configure the system, and then configure security, which is what we're doing right now. So my user permission, my user account was put in the Bluehill administrators group. So if I save this, so right now, Bluehill was validating my who's logged in, which is Gordonov, my Windows login account, validating what group I'm in. I didn't actually change the permissions from what they were before. And you can now, okay, this is what I have the ability to do. These were set to all users. These were set to the Bluehill administrators group. I'm in the Bluehill administrators group, so I'm here. And I have the ability to do these two top things. And although I'm an administrator, I don't have the ability to do any of this. So no users can do that. And you can see that I'm logged in as the administrator. So if I go back to the home screen, my home screen looks pretty standard. You can also see what permissions you have right here from the home screen, so I can see what I'm able to do. So let's go and run a test or open a previously tested sample file. So this is some data that I collected earlier. So you can see I have my results table. You could see that I'm logged in. My username is here in the results table, and you can also see when I ran this test. I am an administrator, and I do have the ability to edit the method, so I can go in here and make changes to the method. If I were an operator, maybe I wouldn't have this, so you wouldn't be able to actually change things within the method. So if you didn't have this ability, this tab would be hidden. So let me run another test. So now I have a new result. You can see if I wanted to change this, maybe I didn't want this to be in kilonewtons, and I don't want this to be kilonewtons right here. I can try to change the properties on the graph, but I can't do that. I can't change these units. Same with here. These are some sorting parameters, but I can't actually change the units. And something that I want to mention is this might not seem like a big deal, but if you change units in your workspace, those units appear on so reports are always in grams force or newtons, and someone were to change the graph to pounds, your results might look a bit different, and it might take some time to figure out why. So we're essentially just locking down the workspace, which then translates into what's in the report. So one thing that I want to mention is if I try to exit out of the software, I see that the way I have security configured, I have to save. So if I say cancel, I'm simply brought back to the workspace. I can't actually close out. If I try to go home, I get the same thing. So if I say, okay, let me save this, you can also see that I can't necessarily browse to a different location. So I'm gonna cancel that. So within the method under workspace, this is where you can choose where you want to lock down a sample file or where your data is saved. So I just picked a folder on my desktop, but I am essentially telling the user this is where you have to save data. And if that user did not have access to the method tab, they wouldn't be able to change that. So now say I try to exit out again, I'll say, okay, I'll save it. I'm locked into this directory. And now if I want to save this sample file, I can try to save it, but I also get another error. And that's because we said no users have the ability to overwrite existing sample files. So I basically have to uprev this if I want to save it. So let's try that again. I'll say save it, and now I have to uprev it, so we'll call this F, and save, and now it's actually letting me do the action that I wanted to do. So it just gives you an idea of what we're capable of doing by the more granular permissions within Bluehill Universal. As an administrator, I have this tab. If you remember, I also said, yes, I want the analysis tab, so I set this here. And I have the ability to edit methods and test specimens. But if I choose to maybe say, that I don't want anyone to have the ability to analyze samples, I can save that. And then I can go back to the home screen, and now you see that I don't have the ability to analyze samples anymore. So a lot of these permissions can be really customized and configured to what your needs are for your lab. I just wanted to review the Active Directory permissions, since most of these permission levels are new or didn't exist in previous versions of the software. So the ability to log in and test specimens, this is new. The ability to exclude a tested specimen. So previously we lumped exclude a tested specimen with change a tested specimen. So we've since split them out because those are in fact two very, very different things. The other things are change workspace properties. That's new. Override sample location, so locking that down where your Bluehill data is saved. Discarding the sample, so eliminating the user's ability to exit out of the software. Overwriting the sample file, so making sure that every sample file has a unique name and cannot be overwritten. And then the ability to configure if you want someone to analyze samples. So using that analyzed functionality, it's very powerful if you have data that you have lots of data and you want to essentially replay that data using a different method. So that's mainly used if you have results, lots of results, maybe custom results that you created with user calculations. And it would be very cumbersome for you to go into your historic data and add those same user calculations. So if that's the case, you would want to basically use this analyze module to replay your sample files, which could be very powerful, but maybe you would only want an administrator to have that ability because they understand the use case for it, so would want to use that. And if you're interested in setting up Bluehill security with Active Directory, similar to that demo that we just went through, we have a helpful document that you as the lab manager or super user can share with your IT department. The document is on Instron.com website on the Bluehill Universal product page. You can also contact your field applications or sales representative for this information, and we'll also supply it as a handout at the end of this webinar. And this document is just really important because if you are planning on using Active Directory, you need to make sure that you've gone through the proper precautions with your IT group in giving your users permissions, so you can just set that up once. Now that we reviewed Bluehill security options, so as a special bonus, I wanted to share 2 new features that can help you better visualize your Bluehill results. So the first is Subsample. Subsample allows users to group their test results. And the second one is adding a pass-fail component to your workspace to quickly visualize if a test passed or failed based on the acceptance criteria that's set up within the test method. So let's review Subsample first. In the screenshot to the right, I have a group of results I collected from doing tensile tests on thin films. And anyone who has done thin film tests know that a film can be cut along the direction or parallel to the machine the film is produced on. This is known as machining, or parallel cut. Or thin film can be cut perpendicular to the machine it is produced on, which this is known as perpendicular cut or transverse cut. Machining cut films tend to have higher elongation, whereas transverse cut films tend to have lower elongations. So in this sample file, I tested both machining cut and transverse cut from one thin film sheet, essentially just a big sheet, and cut it in different 1-inch strips. So with Subsample, I can sort by my results table, this result to cluster all the transverse cut results together, and then all of the machining cut results together. So you're able to do that because I have it set as a result. So you can also do this with, different parameters. If you have operator names, or if you want to sort by pass-fail, maybe your specimens could be different colors, or your product could be different colors. So you're able to subsort by however you choose. And you can display statistics for the entire sample file, or you can display statistics for each group. So here you can see that I sorted by my result for direction of the specimen, and then I have the statistics displayed in the left image for everything, and then in the right for my two different groups. So you can do this with many different things. So here it's sorted by operator name. Some things that I want to note, which maybe some of you picked up on in the demo, but within the results table, there's some new icons that have been optimized for touch to edit the results table. So the pencil is the ability to edit the column properties. So this is where you would edit things like the results title or your units that you're using. In the security demo, you notice I didn't have that pencil because I'm unable to actually change what my results table, what the title of my results are, or I can't change the units. But here you can see that there is that ability. The best, because some results, the title of the result is very long, some is very short, so you can use that best fit to optimize the width of your columns. The group by result, so that's what we're using here. So I would click on operator and choose group by this result, and it would basically split my operators into those different groups. And then sort by, this is the ability to sort your results by maybe highest to lowest or lowest to highest. So if you have a calculation like force at break and you test it at random, results are random, but now you want to sort your results putting the highest max force first and the lowest last, you can shift your specimen numbers around to group like that, similar to how you would do that in Excel. So if you want to also group in the method, you have the ability to choose that in the method. If you want to do it that way, you can. And finally, the PassFail indicator allows users to quickly visualize if a test passed or failed due to the acceptance criteria set up in the method. In the screenshot to the right, I'm looking at specimen number 1, which failed by not meeting the acceptance criteria I created for tensile extension at break. Whereas if I move to specimen number 2, this test passed by meeting the acceptance criteria. And you can see that, with the really large pass icon. So PassFail benefits users who may be running multiple systems in a lab at once and can see the test performance across the room, or if sometimes it's difficult for an operator to know, was that a good test or not? This makes it extremely clear. It was a good test because you see a nice big green check mark, or you would know very quickly if it failed by getting that red X. And you can also see in the results table the ones that did fail and why they failed. So you can see that the first one failed because the result was too low. So that tensile extension at break was too low for the acceptance criteria. So all of this is available in Bluehill Universal. And if you're on Instron Connect, as mentioned, you could download the latest version today and get up and running with some of the things that we've talked about. So just as a recap, the benefits of using Bluehill Universal Security, it really can be boiled down into 3 main categories: safety, data integrity and tracking who ran the tests and what time they ran them. Bluehill Universal security options, Bluehill based, using it within the software, Windows based, linking your local Windows credentials, or Active Directory using user groups on your corporate network. And then 2 bonus features, the Subsample and PassFail. And if you have any questions about any of that, feel free to type your question into the box now. Resources for you when this webinar is over, we'll have send you the PDF of the presentation. Literature can be found on Instron's website on the Bluehill product page. We'll send out the recording of this webinar. We'll have that available. And you always have your Instron sales representative that you can talk with about any of this. So with that, I'll pass it back to Veronica.
Okay, great. Thanks, Elayne. So it looks like we did have a few people who joined us a little bit into the presentation. So just to kind of recap what I had mentioned in the beginning and what Elayne had kind of just said, we want to make sure everyone's aware that we are planning to send out a copy of the recording. So if there's anything that you may want to rewatch or you missed in today's session, you'll have the ability to do that. And we did have some questions come in. I'm just kind of scrolling through here. And okay, so here's the first one. What if my user login is on a different domain than my Instron PC? Will it still work?
Yes, it will work. So let me just jump back to Bluehill. This will probably be easier for me to show. So when I change to Active Directory, you see that Bluehill is identifying the domain. I'm sitting right now in Norwood, Massachusetts, in Instron's corporate office, and I'm obviously on the Instron domain, so it's identifying that I'm on this domain. But if I knew I wasn't, so perhaps I'm assuming for maybe security purposes, this person's user account isn't on the same domain as the computer the Instron is on, you can type in your domain here, with like a // and type in the domain and your user account, and then it will find your user account based on what domain you're on. So Bluehill is identifying, okay, this domain is what this PC is on, but if your user account is on a different domain than your PC, you can type that in, similar to how other software programs work.
Okay.
Hope that answered that.
And I see there's a couple of questions that are somewhat similar. So here's one of them. This person just bought a system, and they had Bluehill Universal installed 2 or 3 months ago. I saw a couple other people said they upgraded to Bluehill Universal recently. So the question here is, how do I get the latest version of these security enhancements, and do you have to pay for them?
So if you recently purchased Bluehill Universal, I think that's in the last year or so, or they just got it installed. So yeah, you can upgrade for free. If you have any sort of IQ/OQ, you would have to redo that. But the actual software license, if you're connected on Instron Connect, you can get it directly from there, a download to the latest, or you can ask your inside sales representative or field sales representative if you can get an upgrade, and no, you won't have to pay for that. If you're on Bluehill Universal and you upgrade to Bluehill Universal, that's free.
Okay. And then the next one here says, it sounds like the person has 2 labs running similar tests, and they want to compare the results between the 2 labs. So can they use the subsample feature across multiple Bluehill sample files at once?
So with Subsample is really beneficial when you have your data from one test. If you want to compare from multiple labs and multiple subsamples, you need more of a database model. So we offer a product called Trend Tracker, which you can export your sample file results into a database and then essentially create the similar functionality that we showed with the subsample feature, but you can do that cross different sample files. So using the Trend Tracker viewer, you could look at those results across many different sample files over time. And the nice thing about Trend Tracker is if you have multiple Instron cases, so there's two, you can have those two systems exporting your results to one database, and then you can have the viewer at your desk, so not in your lab or on your laptop. And then as long as that viewer is also connected to the database, you can query and basically sort your results similar to how we did in Subsample, if that makes sense.
Okay. The next one here. So our IT department does not allow the connect function. Can I get set up for updates via email?
So I guess one workaround that could help if you can't connect to a network on one system, always set up a hotspot in order to connect temporarily. I know a lot of IT groups don't allow ports to be open for long term, but some folks that are IT group will allow a port to be open short term for things like an update or download, because it is so advantageous to do in terms of just timing. It's so easy to do that update directly from the software and get that download. So if it's that could be a little bit of a workaround. It's, you would ideally want to be connected all the time, but if your IT doesn't allow it, you can get permission to temporarily, connect for a 5-minute period or 10-minute period, get the latest version, and then go from there. But otherwise, we do not email out the software. So you would just want to contact your local sales representative, your field applications engineer, and make sure that you get the latest version that way. If you're trying to get the latest version of software and you can't use Instron Connect, and you can't use Instron Connect even for a 5-minute time period, the best thing to do is contact your local field applications engineer or sales representative, and they will help get that to you.
Okay. In the respect of time, do you want to answer one more question?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Can you assign one named user group to a permission?
So can you just repeat the question? I don't know if people care.
Sure.
Yeah.
It is, can you assign more than one named user group to a permission?
Yeah, you can. So that actually brings up a good point. When you're using Active Directory, the permissions aren't inherited. So although I was in the admin group, I was not set up Bluehill managers group or the Bluehill operators group, which that would mean that if any of those permissions were changed, so where I had all users, if I changed that to just the operators, since I'm not in the operators group, although I'm an administrator, I wouldn't have that permission. So my username would have to be added to not only the administrators group, but it would also have to be added to the managers group and the operators group if I wanted to have the ability to do everything. So yeah, you can add that username into whatever group you see fit. I think one way to think about it is I think everyone uses email distribution lists at their companies. So I know at Instron, I'm on a couple of distribution lists. So my account exists in several different groups. An Active Directory is essentially the same thing. So if you have a super users group and a managers group, you might think, oh, well, those two should have the same permissions. Super users are under managers, but it doesn't necessarily work that way. So a manager wouldn't have the same permission as the super users unless they're put into that group. So the benefit of that is customizable. So you can really mix and match and determine what you want to have your have people do. You can also groups for all of those permissions that we went through. So if you want a test a specimen group, you could create that and put certain people in there, and then a login group, a Bluehill login group, you could do that as well. So you can really, just in our example that we went through today, we just had managers and admins, but it's highly customizable.
Okay. So it looks like there were some other questions that came through, and for the sake of time, we may not be able to address them all, but we'll make sure we go through them and we follow up via email afterwards. Just a couple of things I wanted to go through before we wrap up. I know Elayne did mention some items on the Bluehill Universal page. So we want to let you know that we have created a few new short videos about some of the capabilities for Bluehill Universal. A few examples of those are quick test, preloaded test method templates, prompted test. So all those can be found on YouTube and on our website. We are also sharing the PDF handout right now, which is the white paper that Elayne had mentioned during the presentation. So you should see that in the handout section. And then just lastly, if you haven't already, please think about signing up for our newsletters to get all the latest updates from Instron. Signing up is really easy. You just have to go to our home page and scroll down to the bottom to add your email address, and then you'll receive copies of those newsletters. So that is what we have today. So thanks so much, Elayne, for taking the time to do the webinar, and please feel free to email us with any additional